interethnic, sometimes students and issues.
People don't get.
So that is the first background for the teachers' perceptions. And also with the curriculum, this is a new curriculum that was designed in 2018, the National Pre-Tertiary Education Curriculum Framework. And alongside that is the PECA. PECA is a curriculum analysis project. So it's called the Peace Education Curriculum Analysis, which extends current debates in peace education to other curriculums. And so they've done a lot of countries. I Scotland, there's Sweden, there's New Zealand, and there are other countries. So I decided to employ the peace education curriculum analysis and extend it to the Ghanaian setting. And so I did the whole curriculum analysis of the National Pre-Tertiary Education Curriculum Framework. But you see, this peace education, this PECA project usually deals with peace education programs. But for my research, I did it based on non-peace education programs to see how peace education is embedded in the curriculum. So what are my research questions? So my research questions on teachers' perceptions were 4, and then on curriculum was just 1. So the first question for teachers' perception is, how do secondary school teachers perceive the importance of peace education in Ghanaian secondary schools? The second is, how do teachers incorporate peace education in their teaching practice? And the third is, how prepared, equipped, and supported are teachers to teach peace education? And the focus was on teacher education and teacher professional development. The fourth is, what factors support and hinder teachers' role in peace education, and what measures could be implemented to ensure peace education in Ghanaian secondary schools? And the curriculum, I was focused on what is the presence of peace education principles in the curriculum of Ghanaian secondary schools. And I'll talk about what those peace education principles are. So there they are. So these are my theoretical framework. So for the curriculum, I use the PECA project principles, which is, there are 3 elements. The first is recognition of violence. Second is positive peace. And then the third is non-conflict transformation. So I use all these elements for the analysis. And then there's one, I don't know if I should say novel, peace education framework, which is critical peace education by Bajaj. It has been improved since 2008 to 2019. So this critical peace education is what cuts across all my research. So I use critical peace education for both teachers' perceptions and curriculum analysis, but the PECA project was just for the curriculum analysis. And then I use a very indigenous framework as well for my teachers' perceptions, which is Sankofa, which was developed by a friend of mine, Jamra, in 2023. So I used that to analyze the teachers' perceptions. And Sankofa basically means that going back to your values and taking back your values and then employing those values to improve upon peace education in Ghana. So this Sankofa preaches how to include indigenous values, contextual values, and also context-specific principles. And when you look at my findings, you understand why Sankofa was very instrumental in this research and why it's very important for us to use indigenous methods. I think throughout this thesis, I would say that decolonization has been something that has been on my mind, and hopefully maybe we'll take it a bit further. But I was really impressed about how teachers were talking about going back to the principles of the Ghanaian society rather than copying or just being imposed with values of different communities. And so my methodologies. So I employed 2 methodologies because I was doing 2 different things. I used a phenomenological approach, and even with the phenomenological approach, I use the transcendental phenomenological approach. It's a bit wholesome, but yeah, we'll manage it. So for the purposes of not saying it elaborately, I'll say TPA. So I use TPA, and TPA basically talks about they have a word called epoch, giving the opportunity for the research to have its own meaning without adding your own meaning. So you do the research in a way that it's basically about the meaning of what you are doing. So it was developed by Edward Hassel, but it was mainly developed by Mustakas. And it's not here, but you can look him up. And so I used 3 different ways to approach this analysis. So they have the horizontalization, and then you develop the meaning and units, and then you construct the themes. And out of that, I developed themes, which I used for my findings. So I'll first discuss the findings for my curriculum. So based on those 3 different principles, the analysis, what came out of the analysis was there was a failure to unpack the cultural context and these deep-seated acts of violence in society. And so the curriculum was lacking a very critical peace education approach. And so even though the curriculum was there, it was only focused mainly on international norms, peace building norms, and it didn't focus on the various norms of the Ghanaian society. So everything there was mainly globalized norms. You would see sustainable development goals, education for all, everything that all the acronyms were in there except the Ghanaian traditional knowledge system. And then there was non-violent, the non-violence conflict transformation tools mentioned mainly focus on outcomes of the transformation tools than the processes. So this one, with the non-violence conflict transformation tools, all the things that were said in the curriculum just focus on outcomes. They didn't outline how teachers could work towards achieving those outcomes. And I felt it was a big problem because without giving guidelines to how these things would work, it's very difficult to do it. Also, I think there are a bit of nuance with this because not all settings are the same, not all classrooms are the same. So maybe they were trying to give a bit of room for teachers to explore their own initiative to achieve that. But my analysis, it concluded that it would be better for you to give the processes out. People would also have their own approach whilst using those processes, a lay down process, because then you need a very cogent and lay down procedure for teaching. Also, we had inadequate or no representation of some positive peace elements. These positive peace elements were elements of how society could get rid of structural and cultural violence. And structural violence basically about how different groups, different ethnic groups were being treated in the classroom environment or in the school environment. All these things were no representation of this type of positive peace elements. So positive peace would also be how to prevent conflict. So how to help students to be able to arm them with the requisite knowledge to be able to stand when there's conflict or to prevent conflict from happening. We saw none of these elements, and it was a big problem for my analysis. Mostly there was just negative peace, which is something which has been trumpeted by international organizations. And also there were gaps in how to attain peace through the awareness of violence. Nothing said about how to attain peace, and only the mention of certain pockets of violence. And we felt that for a comprehensive framework, especially for Ghana, which has different ethnic extractions, it should have been comprehensive enough to include different ideas from different ethnic groups, and also to include what violence means for all these ethnic groups, and then attain peace for them as well. So these are my findings for the curriculum. And then for teachers' perception, so we asked the teachers for what importance of peace education is. And then most of them indicated that it's peace education helps for unity. It helps to bring cohesion for students in classrooms. And it also helps with teaching, because if there's no peace even around the school environment, education wouldn't go on. Also, teacher education on peace education excluded teachers who trained in universities. This was one thing that my research found out, that there were 2 parallel education for teachers in Ghana, which is the mainstream teacher training colleges and then the university education for teachers. But the teacher training had some elements of peace education in there, whilst the university education had no peace education training. So teachers who enrolled in teacher training had some idea, and teachers who enrolled in university education didn't have any idea. But now, most of the teachers who were employed in secondary schools were university teachers. And it means that there was a big problem there because these teachers lacked a chunk of the knowledge that was needed for them to help to inculcate peace education into their students. Also, from their research, we realized that most teachers indicated that home training was the main reason why peace education was difficult, because most of these students are coming from different homes, from different walks of life, and they were trained differently. So it was having an impact on how they were trying to get them to have this type of peace education. Also, they mentioned this curriculum analysis, which I've mentioned, and I didn't want to reiterate because of my time. And then there were systemic challenges. So these systemic challenges were issues about how teachers were not involved in the decision making for writing this curriculum. So most of these teachers complained that when decisions which were instrumental to students and their education, also their education was being taken, teachers were not involved in it. And it was just a select few of education stakeholders which took these decisions for them. And it was difficult for them to teach or to implement things that they had not made input into. So maybe they had different ideas as to what the curriculum is saying, and they had to teach those things, even though they weren't aligned with them. Because they weren't aligned with them, they didn't see the need to teach the students that type of peace education. And also there were some vestiges of colonialism. You realize that most of the peace education principles that were there were things that were laid down by the British long before Ghana became free. And these things have been passed down straight into the curriculum without recourse to what the Ghanaian indigenous society would want. So these were my findings. And yes, so if you have any questions or reflections, I have a question here. Maybe you've seen it already. I didn't want you to see it, but as an academic, how best can you make peace education in secondary schools more critical and contextual? Yeah.
Very interesting and very relevant as well. Maybe we have time for one question, or we can do it again. Let's do it in the end.
Oh.
Okay. There's a question?
Negative peace.
The question is, what's the negative piece? Negative and positive piece.
Oh, negative peace is just the absence of war. So once there's absence of war, that's negative peace. But positive peace is measures that are put in place to avert war itself, and various structural reasons. So maybe if there are disparities between different ethnic groups, it would cause war. So positive peace would help avert all those things. So equal resource mobilization in the country, distribution of resources, and also helping giving educational opportunities for people and reducing inequalities. All these things are parts of positive peace. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, let's go with the next one, but then if during the following presentations you come up with more questions for Timothy, we will.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. So now it's time for Rebecca. This presentation is this one. 2, 1. Yeah. Okay. You will do it here. Okay. Are we sure we are sharing? Yeah.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hello, everyone online. Hello, all of you. So yeah, my research was about exploring the roles of non-governmental organizations and international aid donors in advancing Senegal's national bilingual education model. I'll start right with a short study background explaining what is the situation of language and education policies in Senegal, and also how I came to my research topic. So Senegal is a very multilingual and multi-ethnic country with around 31 indigenous languages, and 25 of those are recognized as national languages in the country, but they don't have official status. And still, till today, French has the main or the primary position in the country for all the official discourse, and it's also still the main language used in education throughout all levels. And this had obviously a very negative effect on the quality of education because a lot of children don't understand when they arrive in school. And, so there have been attempts to try and change this. Because international research already showed that the disparity between children's home language and the language of instruction is one of the central challenges for quality education in Africa, but also around the world. And that education in the first language of children is actually a human right, and that children have the right to learn in the language they actually understand. So in Senegal, there have been 2 attempts by the government to introduce national languages in the education system after independence until 2008. None of those programs have really led to further policy changes, and they were very small-scale programs. And then the ministry completely dropped out of bilingual education. And NGOs, mainly local NGOs, but also several international NGOs and international donors, came into the field and completely dominated bilingual education from then on, and have been dominating the field for the past 2 decades. And then in 2015, around 2015, the ministry started working on a bilingual language policy for the education system, which is called Modèle harmonisé de l'enseignement bilingue au Sénégal, or short MOHEPS, and it became officially validated 2021. And so my question was, while NGOs and international organizations have been dominating the field for so long, and during this time the ministry started working on a policy, how do professionals who work in the field actually perceive the role of NGOs and international aid donors in advancing this policy? And therefore I looked at 2 sub-research questions. So the first one was, how do professionals perceive these actors' motivation in national language instruction, to see why do international donors actually invest in this question, why do NGOs invest in this question. And the second one was, how do professionals perceive the influence of these actors, and what actions do professionals think have been most influential in shaping the creation and also the preparation of this policy. And professionals, I define them as people who work in the field of language in education policy, and who come from an academic research background, from an NGO background, international aid background, or from the government. But none of these participants were officially representing these institutions, so they were participating as individuals. And for my methodology, I used the qualitative methodology. I've been to Senegal for 8 weeks, where I did the field research. In total, I conducted 18 semi-structured interviews with the individuals I already explained before. And to recruit those individuals, I used snowball sampling. So I worked with a local researcher at the University of Diop in Dakar together, and he has been very helpful in facilitating access, but also to make my research relevant to the context and make sure that my analysis is adapted to the region, to the local realities. And for my analysis, I used a reflexive thematic analysis. I'll not go into detail in any of those things. In general, the interviews were between 50 and 90 minutes, and they were in person mostly, but some of them I had to conduct online because we've been through riots during that time. And everything has been conducted in French, and 2 have conducted in English. And let's jump directly to the findings. So for the first sub-research question, which was about how those professions perceive the actors' motivations, it has been the findings showed that the motivations they told me can be mainly separated between altruistic and self-serving motivations. And mostly altruistic motivations have been connected to local NGOs, where they said that we feel local NGOs invest in these questions because they want to harmonize the education system with the indigenous cultures, with the indigenous values, and yes, support this decolonial movement of breaking away from colonial legacies. And for international aid donors, there has been also some altruistic motivations described, but mostly participants were saying that there have been self-serving motivations behind international donors' investment in this question. And particularly, there has been a lot of criticism towards French aid because La Francophonie has been one of the biggest aid donors in this question. And they said that they feel that the French aid only uses the national languages to improve the French language, and that children learn better in French afterwards, but it's not really valuing the indigenous languages. And they also feel that it's more about expanding the language of French throughout Africa. And this also aligns a bit with the policy France published in 2018, where we want that French becomes again like this big world language. It's one of the main languages, and in Africa is really good for this. And then also there's a bit this geopolitical aspect in there, where Senegal is a really important strategic country in the Sahel region, because there's a lot of security problems. For France, this is particularly an important point because they have already lost a lot of influence in other countries, and participants were saying so they feel like that France, but also other Western countries are accompanying the process or the movement of going to local languages, because they feel like that's how they can keep influencing it. Because when people are empowered in their own languages, empowered in their own values, the risk is higher that you get more, or that influence from outside is more difficult to have an effect. And the second one is about how they feel like they have been influencing and what actions have been really shaping the policy process. So the first one was that they feel like it has been really important that NGOs and international donors have come into the field and a bit sustained bilingual education in the country. And they set a lot of important foundations also for the policy to be implemented now, because they did a lot of advocacy work at community levels to reinforce that education in local languages is important and it is as valuable as French. Also at national level, they really pushed at national level as well to create this policy. Also a lot of teacher training, material production, language development, all this has been supported by those actors. But then there have been also several negative impacts, especially again from international donors, where participants were saying that they feel because there has been no really political will and not a lot of national investment from the ministry in this question, bilingual education is completely dependent on international funding. And through this international funding, the country is just, or the policy in itself is very influenced by international donors. So for example, when US aid came in, there has been already talks about this policy, MOHEPs, in creating an education model that is bilingual. And then the US aid came in and came with an early learning program, which was not bilingual education. And the ministry just threw everything away and they stopped for like 2-3 years working on the policy and just did everything what US aid came with funding. And also now afterwards, where changes have been happening and there is both a closer collaboration, but you can still see that the international funding is very much also defining the priority of this MOHEPs program. For example, the US is funding only language and communication discipline, no mathematics, no other disciplines. And now only this discipline is ready to be implemented because no one else funded the other disciplines. So you can see, even if things are improving, they really have a lot of influence on shaping the policy. And yeah, so many participants said we need stronger national sovereignty. The ministry has to take stronger stance in deciding what is important for our country. We need to get away from these colonial entanglements. Yeah, and that's already my conclusion. So throughout the research, I could see from what participants shared that Western nations still have a lot of influence and in the policy process, especially through their aid contributions, and that there's a big power imbalance between international donors and the local multinational policy, and that they have had some positive influences, but also a lot of negative influences which shaped the policy trajectory. That's it.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, it's always with languages, very problematic. So is there any question here in our audience for Rebecca today? Anything you want to clarify? Right? So, thanks a lot. Next. Yeah. Yeah, you can use this. We're fine, thank you.
I see my slide. So hello everyone. Hope you're all still awake. But yeah, I will be talking to you today about my thesis on a series of fortunate events exploring how social capital and luck moderate the awareness of and access to German scholarship foundations. And so before we thank you. Okay, at least someone's intrigued. That's good. So yeah, before we get started, I'm going to try and as briefly time as possible summarize the German scholarship landscape to you. The first slides have a lot of writing, but it gets easier after that, I promise. So first of all, it's important to clarify what scholarships are in the first place. And the definition I used in my thesis is so scholarships are usually a financial gift, if you will, that are used for the development of basic skills that are then used to contribute to national public diplomacy, support cooperation and exchanges, build excellence and capacity both nationally and abroad, and develop human resources. I mean, as we know from our own program, there's scholarships, whether they are intended for this purpose and actually fulfill this is, a whole nother research you could do, but we kind of have a broad understanding of what scholarships are. And in Germany, it's the case that the scholarship landscape is quite underdeveloped compared to, say, countries like the US and the UK. I mean, to attend universities there, a lot of students rely on scholarships simply because tuition fees are so expensive. This is not the case in Germany. Tuition fees are a lot lower, but nevertheless, such scholarships do exist. And what's particular about the German scholarship landscape is there's 13 so-called Begabtenförderwerke. The English translates, see, Germans can do it in one word, and in English it's 7. So that translates as talent promotion foundations for the gifted, they call it. Again, you can write a whole nother thesis about what is giftedness and so on. But anyway, I will just shorten this term as foundations for the sake of easiness. And these 13 foundations are privately owned. A lot of them they all have either a political party affiliation, a union affiliation, a corporate affiliation, and there's one, which is the biggest foundation, that has no affiliation. Affiliation here meaning that you don't need to identify as someone representing the Christian Democratic Party, but they always are very into applicants sort of mirroring these values. The thing, though, about these scholarship foundations and the selection of their students is that they can do this, they can select based on their own criteria. So although these 13 foundations receive funding from the German government, how they distribute this money and to whom is up to these 13 privately owned foundations. And for my thesis, I looked at scholarship holders. I conceptualized them as winners in meritocracy. What I mean here is simply that scholarships in this case are distributed based on deservedness, which these foundations are, as I said, able to conceptualize however they want. But just keep maybe this term in mind for when I get into my findings. And a few more facts. So basically only 1% so far of all German higher education students are funded by one of these 13 scholarship foundations. So it's a very, very small percentage, but even so, like even more important than to look at it now before they continue to expand, they have goals to increase funding and fund more students. So it's particularly interesting to look at them in their sort of starting point of this funding period. And my sort of, I would say, issue with these foundations is that as of now, not a lot of students are very well informed about this opportunity in the first place. In fact, one of the studies found that 50% of students say they are very uninformed about scholarships in Germany. And as a result, 80% of German students have never applied for a scholarship despite potential eligibility. And based on that, my sort of main foundations for this study were looking at how or what the current student body or social profile of these foundations is. And the last policy evaluation that was conducted was quite a while ago in 2009, which found out that 70% of scholarship holders are from academic households. 2/3 of scholarship holders have at least one parent with a university degree. Just to cut it short, the body of students that is being funded by these foundations is quite homogeneous, and they're from well-educated backgrounds. So this information about how to access these foundations becomes questionable. So I wanted to look into how winners, so how current scholarship holders make sense of their access to the scholarships they hold, and kind of understand, okay, of the people we know who are receiving scholarships, how did they get there? How do they kind of make sense of this whole experience? Again, I'll summarize these three sub-questions into something a bit shorter. So firstly, I wanted to understand, okay, which people were crucial in them gaining access and understanding that these scholarships exist. And secondly, how do they make sense of these actors that were crucial in providing this information? And how do they relate these people to the concept of luck, which was a theme that emerged throughout my analysis, actually. What did I do? I conducted 12 in-depth interviews with current scholarship holders, transcribed the interviews, and then also conducted a analysis like Rebecca. For more information, free to read my thesis, so I will not go into this any further. And so, what did I find out? To keep it, again, sort of brief, because this is the part that I personally thought was a bit less interesting than the part about luck, is who played a major role for students in gaining access to these scholarships. Well, there was 3 sort of subgroups I could divide it into. The first major one was previous scholarship holders, say people who attended their school or who were in their friendship circles, or in a lot of the cases, their siblings were scholarship holders, sort of mentioned these scholarships in a sentence, and this sort of piqued their interest on looking into this more. Secondly, I had a lot of cases where teachers actually approached some of my participants and said, hey, I think you should really look into this. You seem very talented. This might be something for you. And lastly, there were friends and parents who also expressed their support in them applying to these foundations. And yeah, the theme that emerged, which I thought was very interesting, was when talking about how they accessed these scholarships when they applied. Almost all of my 12 participants mentioned luck. And the thing with luck is this is a still very understudied concept. And we all know that like saying things like good luck or, break a leg, all these things are always related to luck, but why are we using luck in these contexts? What are we trying to symbolize? And there was 3 times when my participants, referred to luck. I could kind of put into different boxes. I will just go straight to the quotes because I think they show quite well how my participant here, for example, described their access to information as luck. So Franz says he agrees that you need to know exactly where to find information about these scholarships and that he was just lucky that the scholarship was advertised at uni and was brought to his attention a couple of times. And Susie also says that she just kind of slid into it, which I think is a very interesting way to put, accessing something like this. The same goes for social capital. For those who don't know, social capital just means basically the social connections you have to different people. So here they also refer to them as lucky. Sarah, for example, says that for the application, you have to do a presentation. And she said that a lot of friends and family discussed it with her and she just had the luck that everyone helped her. Again, interesting use of the term luck. And lastly, and this is where this term of the winner and the non-transparent, being a winner in the meritocracy comes up, is that I think, except for one participant, all of them said that them being a scholarship holder was lucky chance. So here, Isabel says, I think what often plays a role is that a lot of people qualify for the scholarships, but then chance just kind of plays a role, whether the people get selected in the end. So she talks about it being a non-transparent application process. So in conclusion, what did I do with all of this information? Well, in terms of the actors that played an important role, certain people in their networks were obviously important in accessing and applying to scholarship foundations. This is a very simplified version of my actual conclusion, but I'll have to keep it short. And then I tried sort of with my results, and especially the reference to luck, trying to debunk this myth of meritocracy, because in theory, a meritocracy means that people who merit something merit it for certain reasons. But what exactly is meritocracy if the winners of this meritocracy themselves cannot even answer why they're in the position that they're in? So I took this as a way to kind of say, okay, this points to a fragility of this meritocratic system. And this discourse on luck that they use illustrates their lack of control in accessing, applying, and being selected for these foundations, which also just kind of highlights that the merit-based structures of these foundations are quite non-transparent, and people can't say why they over someone else deserved something or not. And to conclude, I would just like to leave you with one of the quotes of, again, one of my participants. So I asked her whether she thinks she deserves this scholarship, and in response she said, now I would say, yeah, I deserve it, but I don't know how far I would have to go back to respond no to that question. Because the more I sort of know about scholarships now, the more I start to think, in the end, so many people deserve to be supported. So I would say yes, but I truly also don't deserve it more than others either. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Katia?
Yes.
I was thinking, yeah, meritocracy, that also, what about privilege?
Mm-hmm.
What is the background of these people?
Yeah. So for everyone online, the question, someone's in the waiting room. Well, let's zoom in. The question was whether I also explored any socio-demographic factors of my participants. Yes, I asked them all whether their parents studied, and for all of them, they were also from academic households. So that was something I was very aware of. But at the same time, my participants, to say, were very, very reflective of their positions, because I did also sample them from the organization I was working in that advocates for more equalities in access to scholarships in Germany. So they were already aware of the barriers that exist and the fact that the selection is probably not as just as it could be. So again, you can see it in this short presentation, but they were very aware of the fact that they, had a very good starting position most of the time. So, but I thought it was still interesting that nevertheless they referred to luck in a very subconscious manner. It wasn't like they were saying, I'm just lucky. Like they were very much like, I'm privileged, and then, but luck maybe is also just an important thing. So I think it's just a good like leeway to maybe research more on luck in general, because we use it so like just what's the word, like without thinking about it, but there might be way more meaning hidden behind it than we actually realize. Yes, thank you.
Allora. Well, that's not mine. We're it's this one. This one. Ecco, io. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Galina. And I was researching how Dutch language teachers experiences employing intercultural education in primary schools in the Netherlands, where refugee children study. And just a shout out to my family who is watching right now. Sorry, I feel like I want to do that. Hello, Mark and Theo and Jeanette Mom. So just a small overview. We'll go through a bit of an introduction, then I'll draw on the aims and objectives and the research questions I was looking into, then a bit of literature review, like what I found out, what gaps there were, then theoretical framework and methodology, how I did my research, then the results and some conclusions with the recommendations for future research and policy and practice. Just a bit like to draw like why I got curious in this particular topic, because I'm not Dutch myself. But right now I live in the Netherlands, and being also kind of a migrant and expat there, right? So I thought, how do I fit in, because like the Netherlands is really welcoming, they speak English and all, but they're not particularly, I would say friendly on the migrant question. For instance, just recently, the government in the Netherlands has fell apart because they couldn't agree on the migrant question. So that kind of also can show what the feeling is in the government and in the policy. And I am myself a teacher, and I've been teaching for like 7 years now. So I thought, I really would like to see how teachers are doing that, And then I thought, intercultural education, how we do that? And I wonder how teachers actually implement it if they know it. And I thought, well, let me just read a bit into the literature review, and I found out that it's a quite fluid and vague concept. So it's really difficult to define, and it can serve any political agenda, like intercultural education. So, and I was like, how does the Netherlands do it? And well, it's turned out that they just mention it briefly with really quite general terms, like what it actually is, but so they don't really implement, they don't really conduct any policies. And I thought, that's interesting. Let's dig deeper. How do teachers do that? I'm curious, like, do they, well, how do they use it, right? So the aim was to understand that, how they work with refugee children, how they implement intercultural education. So there were 3 sub-questions that I was looking into, or objectives in this case, that afterwards went to the research questions. So how do Dutch language teachers understand and conceptualize intercultural education, like what it is? How would they define it, right? Then how they integrate the elements of intercultural education, so what tools they used in the classroom, then what benefits and challenges they see in incorporating intercultural education. So again, just a brief overview, like right now, the Netherlands is quite overwhelmed with different people, both like those who flee all kinds of armed conflicts, like the war in Ukraine, for instance, or just expats who are coming to the Netherlands to work, and quite often, like just children who don't speak Dutch, they are just placed in one classroom all together. So teachers somehow have to like understand how to work with all the kids who come from different backgrounds, and also from different situations, right? So some are coming from really traumatic situations with really traumatic experience as well. Others come from, well, as expat families who have all kinds of privileges. So that was also quite interesting. And when I was looking into the literature, I realized that, there is so much written about intercultural education, but like there is no guidelines, or like there's no practical application of this theory. So quite many academics, they say, well, it's great to theorize it all, but let's bridge the theory and practice somehow. So that is a gap in the literature. Then also intercultural education, IE, by the way, stands for intercultural education. It doesn't consider teaching intercultural education to refugees, like they don't specify it. So there's no literature that says intercultural education for refugees. So that is also kind of a gap in the literature. And then I was looking at what tools are they like exploring in general. So there, what was mentioned is reflecting and talking, which consequently did evolve in my results as well. Like unconventional teaching approaches, such as like, let's not just sit straight, like let's think of somehow differently, how differently we can approach the lessons. Role playing, different situations, which also emerged in my results, using cultural artifacts, like kids can bring a Quran and talk about that, or Matryoshka and talk about that, and working with parents as well. As for theoretical framework, I used 2 of them. So the first one was by Buren, the framework to analyze intercultural competence. I used it to like pin down what intercultural education is and what benefits, to analyze the benefits that I would find out. And the framework by Lidicode to analyze the tools that teachers use, because it's more practical, like it really gave the outline, like, okay, this is what intercultural tools are, and then you can kind of could match it. So as for my methodology, there were 9 semi-structures and depth interviews. And just to give a bit of a background, I reached out to like 150 schools and only 9 teachers replied. That was a bit frustrating. I also kind of got the answers like, we don't work with non-Dutch students. So also was interesting to see like how a non-Dutch person or someone who is not studying in the Netherlands can actually enter this field. My interview guide was consisted out of 2 parts. The first one was just with more general questions to explore the meaning of the intercultural education with the teachers. But the other ones, the second part consisted out of 3 graphic vignettes. And the graphic vignette is a kind of drawing with a particular situation that can happen in the classroom. And I read into the literature, like, okay, what kind of well, problems may arise in the classroom, and I drew that. Don't judge my drawing. I'll show you that later. And then like I followed up with some questions on that. So teachers could really like see this drawing and relate to that. The analysis was thematic analysis, which has been already mentioned today, and inductive coding, which means that my data drew my coding, not like that I didn't have any preset coding frame. And the limitations were, well, I cannot really generalize my results because those who agreed to participate, they were probably aware of the necessity of intercultural education. So I don't know how other teachers would do that. Of course, time constraints, I could hypothetically look into like, okay, how teachers not only talk, but how they actually use it. But then I would need to reapply for the ethical approval in the University of Glasgow, which was a bit of a pain everywhere. And yeah, and sampling, like again, like who answered, who decided, who wanted to take part in my research. They were quite, well open-minded, very sweet people. So again, they really thought it's necessary to use intercultural education. I don't know how other teachers would do that. So this is the example of my my graphic vignette, and there were three. This particular one kind of refuses to take part in any Dutch culture and speaks Russian because that's the only language I could write as well in. And the other two were about being bullied because of the cultural discrimination that can arise in the classroom, and also just refusing to share your own culture. So I looked into that. First, this is my theoretical framework, coding framework, and just for being conscious of time, thank you, Zhenya, I will jump into the results. So the understanding of the conceptualization of the intercultural education was that, all right, schools have to be safe and secure, and this is what intercultural education is. Then they also said that, okay, intercultural education is respecting everyone, then also getting better to know all kinds of cultures. And some people said, we Googled, like we weren't sure, because I sent them the interview guide in advance, and they said, well, we just Googled. So also kind of tells what they know about it. As for the tools that emerged, well, this is my one from my coding frame. These were all the tools. There are so many tools. I was shocked, and there were so many interesting programs and things that, well, some people like they didn't really repeat things. So yeah, I would personally point out the social emotional tools that they use, because all teachers mentioned it and they said, oh, that's very important. We really have to work with their social emotional condition and mental health and mental well-being, because that can, like, education cannot take place without feeling safe and secure. And also reflexive questions, like Dutch are very good at asking questions, and teachers are included. So they're like, they never tell students, never tell kids like, oh, you can't do that. But they ask them questions. How would that make you feel? What would you think of that? So that really struck me, yeah, really, really much. But there were so many things. And that was also kind of proving that teachers don't really know, they don't really have one thing that they use altogether. And what many teachers use as challenges, for example, that they had to come up with materials themselves. So they were sharing it together with each other on some Facebook groups. So there was no guideline from the government or like from maybe teacher union. Yeah, that made it challenging. And also there is a lack of teachers right now in the Netherlands. So teachers are so overwhelmed, and so like their workload is crazy. And well, on top of that, they have to develop this kind of, this materials, which doesn't really, I don't think that the time is paid that they would spend on it. So yeah, they are just overwhelmed, and that is a big challenge for them. Another challenge is dealing with kids who don't know how to write, for instance, while some other kids in the same classroom speak both English and another language, you know? So really different level of preparation of kids in the classroom, and hence intercultural education is difficult to deliver. And as for the benefits, there's adaptation both in the host country, or if they go somewhere else, they say, yeah, they're going to be open-minded. So it's a really important thing to teach them that. Integrating in the Dutch society, but just also integrating, the Dutch society is not it's not predominantly Dutch anymore. People come from so many different backgrounds, and just understanding people in the society was mentioned also in all the interviews. And communication skills, we learn how to talk to different people, and I guess we guys also in our program learned that as well. And as a conclusion, there are the recommendations for future research and for policy and practice. mainly is just to keep on researching this thing, the intercultural education field in the Netherlands, but also in other countries, look how curriculums integrate that, whether teacher training programs use that, and also look into, well, expanded theoretical framework, think of also the social emotional learning, not only look into just how kids who come from, well, right backgrounds, sorry, I am lost with the words, but like who come from quite a healthy, like with healthy, stable backgrounds, and how kids who flee from the war, for example, yes, they also have to be taken into account in theoretical frameworks and how we assess the tools. And for policies in practice, like include trauma-sensitive teaching, because teachers are like they use their reflex questions, but they don't really know the tools. And well, develop perhaps the practical intercultural guidelines so that teachers can always look up, oh, how do I teach that? Or how do I deal with this kind of difficult situation? So yeah, sorry for going over time. That's it. Can I go more longer than questions? Yeah. Okay. So thank you to our students. We will come back in half an hour with more presentations. So I hope to see you there again. Thank you for your attention. The world are especially high in Spain too, concretely after the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, suicide is the first cause of non-natural death amongst youth from 12 to 29 years of age since 2019, so even before the pandemic. And there is overall a lack of preventive national strategy and insufficient expenditure in mental health care and access to. This is coupled with also socioeconomic inequality, poverty, and risk of exclusion affecting certain adolescents most. But of all age groups, adolescents are most impacted also by socioeconomic inequality, which has also been rising since COVID-19. And the community of Madrid, which is one of, well, the region that I focused in and where I come also, and where I've been working with youth and adolescents for the last 6 years, is one of the OECD regions with highest socioeconomic segregation between schools. So public schools concentrate students from different socioeconomic backgrounds and segregate in terms of low and high socioeconomic income. And this is a matter of education rights and access to it, right? So these two challenges coupled together have been, well, addressed by certain latest reforms. The latest education reform law and child protection law 2 have been providing some intentions to promote and intervene on the rising well-being of adolescents and promote caring educational spaces. But our question is this enough? Yeah, and I also saw that there was a need for more qualitative and participatory research in the field and in the specific region. So this is a bit the context. And the questions that brought me here have been shaped throughout the field work, which has been challenging in such a big region. And they are: how is the current state of student well-being in public secondary schools in the region of Madrid, as defined by them? And what school factors influence student well-being most? So what school practices are identified as caring by them in school? And in what ways does a school's socioeconomic composition influence student well-being and a school's capacity to care for it? These are the guiding questions. This is going to be quick because we don't have a lot of time, but the guiding inspiring theories are culture of care, which dates from long ago, but has been moving a lot of research in this field, and it promotes, well, yeah, it argues for effective and supportive culture in education for learning and well-being to occur. But in a way also, it lacks on looking at who has access to care in education and if it's well distributed. So feminist and global South stances have also guided a bit
my research in terms of reminding us that everyone needs care, yet there's an equal distribution of care work and access, which is overly loaded on women, especially women from migrant backgrounds in the case of Spain, and posits care as a public good. And then, well, other frameworks. The last one, which is one of the most important, is the distributive justice framework in education, which posits that care is a matter of equality, and in deep unequal education systems like the Community of Madrid, we need a redistribution of care resources too. I'm going to take care of the time too because it's flying. Just quickly, my methodological design was qualitative. It draws from student voice theory, so I wanted to put student voices in the center. It builds knowledge bottom up, but also draws on theory, and it wants to provide solutions to a challenging and urgent matter, which is mental health challenges and socioeconomic inequality. So I did one case study in a secondary school in a mid-high socioeconomic context, and there I did in-depth interviews with 11 students and also with teachers and school counselors. But this wasn't enough. I thought that it was a very segregated socioeconomic composition, so I wanted to hear out from other teachers and school counselors. And in the end, I outreached to more teachers and school counselors from 6 other public schools in the region. You can see them a bit, like around the area of Madrid. So they represent quite a wide diversity of socioeconomic context, because Madrid is very divided in terms of socioeconomic income. The north can be more high income, and the south less income per unit or home. So yeah, in the end, I worked with 27 people, 11 students, and 12 teachers and four school counselors who are in a way very present at caring and promoting well-being among students. So I found their voices were very important in this conversation. I also did thematic analysis, thematic analysis, like many of us did a lot of reflexiveness here. And through that, I came to 3 main conclusions. So answering the first question, the current state of student well-being at this particular school, which again is a white middle class, mid-upper class context, there's a trend of feeling stressed, overwhelmed, nervous, frustrated, or anxious at school, especially marked by exam and evaluation periods. No? And some students experience even more challenging experiences at school with anxiety attacks, lack of concentration, difficulty to socialize, especially marked after COVID-19. Teachers also agree after COVID-19 and the increased use of social media, students with express more anxiety, more tiredness, more difficult to concentrate. Also, teachers and school counselors agree that there's an increase of peer violence in public secondary schools. School counselors especially see the more difficult realities because they've received students who are experiencing more difficult challenges at school, and especially in those schools in lower income concentration of students, they see every day, like they mentioned the concept of turning out fires. No, every day there was a situation of calling the ambulance or having to deal with very difficult conflicts in the school. So in a way, mental health challenges were found across socioeconomic contexts in all secondary public schools, and they all agree that they've risen, but coupled with socioeconomic migrant context difficulties like evictions, lack of access to public health. My question was, how do these questions differ in terms of socioeconomic context? So on the question of school factors that influence student well-being, it's a long process. So what stand out most for students were friendships, social belonging, and their support and feeling a gusto, which means at ease, was like the key that came out. And they also mentioned academic factors, but there's a social difference between the social world and the academic world in their accounts. Student-teacher relationships bridge these worlds, no? They're academic and personal support through expression of cariño is what brings students social and academic worlds in school. Teachers and school counselors have a broader view, and they speak more of convivencia, which is in broad terms school climate rather than student friendship, and say that this is crucial for their teaching and also their learning and well-being. Yeah, and they also found, well, that socioeconomic conditions in and outside school, like grouping decisions and expectations from families, already influence students' possibilities to feel well at school. So the background, the socioeconomic migrant background, has already an important load on how students feel at school and how students themselves express it, right? Yeah, moving forward and fast. So very broadly, caring practices that students, teachers, and school counselors found that care for student well-being at school is, well, the act of preoccupying, of worrying for students for their well-being, expressions of cariño or affection, protecting, keeping safe, defending, attending to one's or others' needs, listening, talking. And students value both academic and affective care, but they really put an emphasis on we need teachers that are close affectionately, and that again shows that teaching is an emotional and effective engaged work. They also mentioned that caring is embodied, enacted, and also expected from other students. So it's shared and it's multidimensional. It doesn't go unilaterally from students, teachers to students, which places a lot of load on teachers otherwise. And yeah, so teachers and school counselors especially talked about a culture of collective care, and schools, public schools, that to integrate a shared concept of caring where everyone has a responsibility, especially teachers and school counselors and specialized educators, and so democratize the responsibility to care for well-being. Then to sum up, this is maybe the more complex part of it, but I will try to be fast on it. In a way, in a nutshell, the possibility to feel well at school is very much determined by our background, but the capacity to care at school, by a school, is also very much determined by the composition, the socioeconomic composition of a school. So ill-being is present in all socioeconomic contexts, yet the family support, presence, economic material resources that we have facilitate both students' academic and affective care. And that determines then who has access to these cares and well-being possibilities at school. And then, I found that in terms of caring capacity of a school, there's 4 determinant conditions. So the experiences, ill-being experiences that students bring into school and share that may require attention and support are much larger in schools that concentrate other socioeconomic challenges and also migrant backgrounds. So the homogeneity of schools determines a lot the capacity of the school to care, and also the quality of that care and the relationships of students and teachers. Then, teacher and school counselor working conditions is another determinant condition to the capacity to care. And in some schools where there's overload of challenges, especially in lower income contexts, there's 60% of rotation of teachers every year, a lot of burnout, high workload, a sense of helplessness, and lack of staff. So they have even less capacity to care for that well-being. So there's already an unequal distribution of the capacity to care between schools. And then, of course, the available economic and material resources are not equally distributed. So very fast as a conclusion, current student well-being at this current mid-high socioeconomic composition school is marked by high academic expectations from families, exam pressure, and the importance also of supportive student relationships, especially after COVID-19. Student-teacher relationships are marked by intentional support, communication, validation, and affection, or cariño, as a lot of students described, are very valued by all participants. And but this cannot fall on teachers alone, right? So schools and educational staff have a crucial role in student well-being, yet it can only occur with increased and sustained resources. So care is currently not accessible, nor of the same amount of quality to all students, nor to all public secondary schools in the community of Madrid. And care without a social justice and anti-racist perspective can reproduce existentialist white savior approaches to care. So we also need to think about what care is in such an unequal context. And yeah, in a way, we need more research and definitely more commitment and will, both for the affective and the material part of what care means. And throughout the research, we ended up with students, teachers, and school counselors. They ended up doing a list of 36 policy recommendations of themselves. These are only 10 that we intend to provide to the administration in some ways. So this is work on progress. And what stands out like clearly is that we need to reduce teacher-student ratio to care. We need more public mental health experts inside and outside school, specialized teaching staff, reduce teaching hours, definitely generate a just distribution or redistribution of resources between secondary schools that in a region like Madrid are very highly segregated, and those don't have the same capacities to care. Otherwise, we'll be doing it over the well-being of everyone. So, yeah. Sorry for the slides. I get it. Like, it's very difficult to summarize everything in 10 minutes. So no problem. Any questions here? I could extend it on Zoom, but yeah, let it.
Yeah. Advocacy and Cyprus. So yeah, really cool results. I was wondering if I think it's cool that you mentioned to focus on the status. Having done this now, is there something you can conclude in terms of also socioeconomic systems, like say, like, you know, you say better to mixed or less segregated, like what's your on the whole socioeconomic status?
So I think it's a matter of education rights to learn in diverse contexts too, and to have access to diverse learning contexts. So from that standpoint, however, a lot of like hearing out teachers and school counselors and students, especially, they say that in such a segregated context already, bringing together, they're doing these strange mixes of classes. They bring the lower end, academically speaking, of students in a group and the higher end, like the bilingual who speak French and English and Spanish. The teacher doesn't have the time nor the capacity to attend to everyone's diversity. So that is, a lot of teachers said that is not really diversity, that is bringing together the two ends of like very different academic backgrounds. And so there's an ongoing debate on how and whether it's also teachers' responsibility or like absolutely burned out. Like I spoke to many of them that were on medical leave before or were going to be, to address to that diversity in an already segregated. So I think it's a matter of a region that has completely segregated schools already. So first, policies need to really commit to desegregating and a very, very difficult landscape, so that it doesn't fall on the shoulders of teachers and school counselors, which is something that I doubt is going to, because it's been like a unique school choice region. So people with resources go to the schools they want to, and the others stay in their neighborhood. So it's very residentially segregated. Sorry? I didn't. No, and it's very hard to convey the whole work, but I think like everyone, we've had like difficulty to express the challenge of doing all this field work, and then yeah, it's putting it in a nutshell, it's like an impossible task. But yeah, I think it's a work on progress, and I really think that research has a lot to say, because there's a lot of data out there showing segregation, but student voices, teachers and school counselors have been left out of the conversation. So I think it's a national and also regional challenge.
Now we Isabella. Ecco. Sorry. Oh, you want I think I have it. Do you have it? Isabella. Very good. I just put a timer. Yeah. Share screen. Okay. What is yours? I used to say. Oh, yours. So, hello everyone. Thank you very much for being here. And well, I would say also hi to my people in Brazil. So, oi, se você estiver assistindo. So, my name is Isabella. I'll be presenting my master thesis about a specific education program in Barcelona, which the name is Schools for Equality and Diversity. Of course, this is the translation to English. And I was able to do an analysis for an intersectional feminist policy and in public education in Barcelona. So, yeah, it's working. I think. So for today's agenda, I'll be talking a little bit about the introduction, then moving to objectives and research questions. Also, just dig deeper a little bit into the context, the methodology, the findings and discussion, and finally, the conclusion. So to give you a little bit of context, the background in the introduction, when we are talking about education, we also need to talk about gender equality because these two concepts, they intersect, especially because the school environment is a main socialization agent in which the hegemonic models of society are reproduced and therefore they are transmitted. And because of this, also the gender disparities. So in the Spanish, Catalan, and specifically Barcelona context, the co-education concept is very strong in this sense because it's a way to explain this intersectionality. And when we go to the further into the context of the European Union, we can see that the EU has been adopting important measures towards gender mainstreaming. So, for example, we have a specific strategy that talks about equal treatment legislation, gender mainstreaming, to progress towards a gender equal Europe by 2025. And in this context, if we have a look into Spain, Spain is a country with a notable history of feminist movements of fighting for women's rights, especially political and democratic ones. And in this sense, I was interested in having a look more into the educational field to see if it is also the case. So what I was able to find as a gap is that in the educational field, much research has been conducted on co-education concept, but there is still a little comprehensive discussion of the relationship between gender equality, co-education, and gender mainstreaming. And despite its inclusion in the legislation, again, education peers and in different legislation in education context in Spain, the interventions are too scarce. So we have limited evaluation of their effectiveness and also regarding the policy-making process and the teacher training inside these programs. In Catalonia, where we are now, specifically in Barcelona, the program that I had a look, it's called, as I mentioned before, but now this is the original Catalan name, Escoles per la Igualdad y la Diversidad. And this program exists since 2014. And just following the same goal of reaching gender equality through different social institutions, following the EU, for example. Here specifically, we are having a look into finding this balance between genders and human rights through schools, and therefore this is the chosen case. So the objective of my study was to comprehend how this co-educational program in public schools, specifically in Barcelona, understands and frame the concepts of co-education, gender equality, and gender mainstreaming. And additionally, I had a look into I had an analysis of the theory of change behind this program and also the current challenges.
So the research question that were guiding my work was, how does the program understand the concepts of gender equality, co-education, gender mainstreaming, as I mentioned before. But also I had secondary questions such as, where did policymakers borrow this concept from? How did policymakers frame these concepts in the educational context? And finally, not only what is the theory of change that the program has, or which is the theory of change that the program is based on, but it's specifically what are the challenges that it faces. So to have a little bit more of the context in regard to the program, it was established in Barcelona through a government measure of the city back in 2014. So it has been almost 10 years already. And the main objective was to implement a program centered on the prevention of abusive relationships, male violence, and racial discrimination, but also the prevention of discrimination based on functional, sexual gender identity, and also ethnic, cultural, religious orientation. So it's a little bit of a broader program that not only talks about gender equality, but more like inclusion and diversity as a whole. And the target group was primary and secondary teachers and students, and also the education community. So the program was organized by the City Council, and they provide different trainees for teachers and also students in different moments, but in partnership with relevant social organizations in the municipality. And the duration is 2 years, which the first one is focused on developing the content and methodology with the teachers, so training the teachers and also educators. And the final project is in the second year. So this is a final project to be delivered as a result of the engagement of the school. So and also, of course, to be presented with the community. The methodology is specifically, it was a qualitative research, and I chose to a case study. But when I was doing my analysis and also gathering data, what I chose was to have a look into the documents available from the Generalitat, which is basically the regional government, and also Ayuntament, which is basically the city council. And I was having a look into all the education documents and policies that goes also regard gender equality since 2014, when the government measure was finally launched. And I also had some structured interviews, face-to-face and online-based, with policymakers. And here, if you are asking what are policymakers, in this case, were the coordinator of the program, the teacher trainers, and also these partners, which is from social organizations in Barcelona. And I made 4 interviews. And finally, I had a brief moment in public school in Trinitat Nova, which is a neighborhood of Barcelona, through a volunteer that I was doing, so just to have a deeper look into the reality. And as other colleagues, I also did a thematic analysis. That's why I organized my data. Yeah, wow, what a new approach. Yes. And just to, before I go to the finding the discussions very quickly, I acknowledge that my study has some limitations because firstly, I was looking more into the teacher's practice in the beginning, but I had to change the way my research was going, because although throughout the program, we invited many teachers from secondary schools to take part into the interviews. They did not take, so I had to go to the policymakers only. So that's why I acknowledge that there's a limitation, the sampling. But also I acknowledge that I am a person from Brazil, so I have a completely different background, and I'm trying to analyze such a diverse Catalan context. So this is also a limitation, and this is how I put myself. And finally, the findings and discussion. Basically, the program adopts a symbolic frame of all these concepts, and they link these concepts, of course, to concepts that we already know, such as diversity, inclusive language, and feminist education. These are 3 main axes that are very strong. And why they do this is because they are trying to facilitate the participants, in this case, students, teachers, and education community. They link these concepts to their reality, and they have a look into the education throughout this lens, And the final objective is to change their beliefs and attitudes towards gender roles and bias. And it's very clear that this conceptual framework is not just as a coincidence. Actually, all the interviews showed me that it was very clear, no, that this program is not only pedagogical, but it has a specific ideology, philosophy, and political approach. And in this case, we can find that they borrowed the concepts from the UN gender equality agenda, different legislations in the EU, Spain, and Catalonia, and specific Catalan authors that discuss about coeducation, because coeducation is not only understood as, for example, you have girls and boys in the same school, as mixed school, but it's also understood as a way to really fight against inequalities. And in this sense, they frame all of these concepts really take into consideration the intersectionality concept, which is explicitly from the intersectional feminist movement as they connect to the education. And in this case, the theory of change, which is another topic I was having a look, emphasize the teacher's training to gender-sensitive issues, but also it states that teachers will learn to counteract the intersectional inequalities that they face in the school when they become aware. So when they become aware of these inequalities, they also can pass through the students and discuss with them. And they have different objectives in the short and long term, such as improvement in the school and classroom atmosphere, but also they are looking towards later into education for citizenship and human rights awareness. And based on Unterhalter and discussing gender equality education, I found also that although we have a clear theory of change of this program, and although it's very clear the political approach, there are still significant challenges, such as they need more sufficient financial support for evaluation. So the pilot test, which was the first 2 years, almost 10 years ago, they had enough money into this program, but now they don't have anymore. So they are not doing evaluation after year after year. Also, they need to establish a school follow-up network, because now it's only one coordinator for all the schools involved in here, and it's more like than 40 schools. And also expand co-education to vocational adult education, because it's not only for secondary and primary school, but it's also important because there is a huge gap discussing co-education in this field. And finally, to restrain the political background, because this is completely linked to the authorities that were in the power during the time. So that's why they took this approach. But if we maybe we have some against force, for example, the interviewers, they were discussing about position from the extreme right wing. If they go to the power at some point, this type of problem would definitely change a lot of territory, and only this way they can really make significant change. So my recommendation would be to, of course, invest in this, because this is how we make policy, but also I would like to further investigate the framework application focused on teachers, because as I mentioned before, I didn't have the sampling to do that. And also not to examine the scope between these three concepts in the Catalan region, which is still very strong, but also in other autonomous regions of Spain. And that's it. Sorry for the delay. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, if you want to just keep in touch, that's my LinkedIn, and that's it.
Good. Thank you. Any there for any?
Yeah, wow, that's fine. You can just send me a message also later. That's thank you very much.
Sure, thank you,
Yeah,
Isabella. So, Isabella. Isabella, being Brazilian, she has focused on Catalan policies, and here Xenia, being Catalan, you still has focused on in Brazil. So let's hear to Xenia's story. And está entregada por
It's like this is the advantage of being from Barcelona. I have half of my friends here. Thank you for the support.
Llegem. Al cine, esperamos. ¿O el otro? No. Open it. Ya, perdón. Es que no sé. Però estàs compartint la... Sí. S'ha de compartir la pantalla, no? Llavors, vale, doncs fiquem això. Vale.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for all of you being here. It's a pleasure after this long journey to be able to talk about this topic that has like driven me crazy sometimes and also like very, very happy some other times. And so I'm gonna talk about the my research topic, which is the ebb and flow of gender and sexuality education policies, focusing on LGBTQA+ organized civil society influence on policy making and resistance to the anti-gender agenda in Brazil. And also thanks to my supervisor, Mauro, I don't know if he's somewhere there online, for this support. And just to say also that all the pictures that are in, all the pictures that are in the taken by myself, and also some of them are taken from this book, which is from an author, a Brazilian author, Rogério Junqueira, who became basically a friend. And so this is like an amazing book with a lot of like images about like propaganda and everything. So just like, so it's stressed. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, why is it not working? What? Yeah. Well, so I'm just gonna keep talking. And yeah, because I didn't know if I had the time for that, but while we fix this, but just to say that I've been very reflective, as like all my colleagues here know, about my positionality. And I think it's important to acknowledge since the beginning that my identities have both things that help me and like make me part of this fight, but also have limitations. I'm a white woman, young, bisexual, middle class female researcher. So I think that is important to stress with you, but also with my interviewees, who I was talking through this like very transparent. How did you do it? Just okay. So this is the structure of the presentation. Okay. So just a little bit of context. This is a timeline of the gender and sexuality education policies trajectories. So we have the first period of democratization, which also opens up to these topics to be introduced in education. And then we have in Brazil this like first 10 years of the 20th century where there's low institutionalization, but there is a lot of production of these education and policies for gender and sexuality. However, since 2011, there's the start of a direct cut of one of the main programs that was working on these topics, the kit, Antimophobia kit. And there is a lot of pressure from opposition politicians. And here you have some images of what who you might already know, Bolsonaro, Jair Bolsonaro, who did this campaign against literally these policies on gender and sexuality. And so after these 20 decades of like ebbs and flows of these policies, I focus on this specific period under the government of Jair Bolsonaro, which some authors called it governance at the crossroads between low institutionalization, rejection, and assimilation within the government. So in that moment we arrive and we have this and an extreme right conservative president in Brazil, right? And then when this is also like a little bit of context that it's quite already illustrating of, sorry, it's in Portuguese, but Damaris Alves as the Ministry of, like, appointed Ministry of Women's, Female, Family and Human Rights by Jair Bolsonaro's government. She said openly as a political speech, a new area is starting in Brazil. Boys will wear blue and girls will wear pink. And so they go with this advertisements as like a happy day of child without abortion, sorry, pedophilia, drugs, and gender ideology. And so in this book, again, Rogério goes like Terra Brasilias, from the discrete participation in the formulation of discourses, anti-gender discourses, to the adoption of the anti-gender agenda with as a policy of state. So Damaris Alves, as a evangelic pastor, she is now the ministry in charge of everything related to gender and sexuality education. She is now not like in that moment. So remember that's like our focus is 1922. Not to stress anyone, like you breathe now. And so my research question is, how and under which conditions have LGBTQA+ civil society actors with a focus on gender and sexuality education articulated their resistance against the convulsive political period marked by the extreme right and conservative government of Jair Bolsonaro, 2019-2022? And to answer these questions, I propose two research aims, which will also be what structures the findings. So on one hand, I want to explore the repertoire of actions while being accounting for the context forces that have an impact on that. And on the other side, I want to unravel the responses that LGBTQ+ civil society actors had towards this government and what interactions they had. But just, I'm not going to get to the theoretical perspective, but just so you know that there's one first block of theories coming from social movement politics, and the other from these state civil society relationships. And then my methodology is qualitative, it follows a qualitative approach, and it works with a triangulation of three different instruments. First of all, I conducted 22 semi-structured interviews using a snowball sampling, and I resulted into this 24 representatives from different backgrounds. That's what I call organized civil LGBTQ+ organized civil society. I also conducted documentary analysis and participatory observations. I'm not going to get into that. In my thesis, it's very well explained. And so also this is just like briefly an overview of from where this interviewees were in Brazil. There's obviously an uneven representation. It's always more difficult to reach the northeast and the north parts of Brazil, as they have a more complex reality, and like the biggest cities and like urbanized cities are located in these areas, but that's obviously a limitation of the study. And so we arrived to the results. The first, remember, there were two goals. So the first result responds to the first goal of understanding what actions of influence these this organized civil society employed and mobilized. So what I found through my interviewees and also through the reports that I analyzed is that there were a lot of new networks and coalitions that appeared during this period as like formation, as for instance, one that we have here, Profesores contra Escolas en Partido, as Escolas en Partido being the main program against everything related to critical thinking, to gender and sexuality education, to anti-racism education. And so there was this collective created mainly by few teachers, like 4 teachers, but they had a key impact on another coalition that was created, which is named Coalition Against Ultra-Conservatism in Education. And what they were doing basically is gathering all the data they could and share it about how these ultra-conservatism attacks were working and how like fundamentalist religious sectors were getting into the schools to like do this like tergiversation of ideas of gender, so like introducing basically gender ideology. And then about the framing tactics that this organization used, it was interesting to see how differently they were using international bodies when they were national or national organizations or these coalitions as asking for please world or Latin America, because they were also using Latin American bodies. See what is happening. This is undemocratic. This is going against constitution. And then there was also, even despite the pandemic, there were also like street contentious actions. There were a lot of knowledge production, as this one here, Manual de contra Censura en las Escolas, that was mainly also led by the Profesores contra Escolas en Partido. And then a very interesting result was the SPF, is the Tribunal Federal Supremo Tribunal Federal. It's so the judicial branch, and it was mainly used because when the executive and legislative branch were blocked, completely blocked, what these coalitions could do is go to the judiciary branch and ask for instance, the consideration of the anti-constitutionality of this project, which they achieved in 2021. And here, about this specific finding, there are a couple of quotations. I'm just going to read these ones because I find it very interesting. Today, everyone already talks about the STF before no one even knew it existed. So it really changed the perspective of how under conditions of critical context, you can, as a civil society organization, can use also this branch in the context of Brazil. And for the second finding, the second section of findings about the relationship between civil society and the state, there was completely rejection from these organizations to the state, and there were even infiltration strategies, as like knowing someone was there and like could give some information of what was happening inside those four walls of like non-understanding and like anti-democratic policies. And there were this concept of reactive juridification came as a very key finding, as it meant the use of the judicial branch. It not only meant that there were factual achievements, as being able, for instance, to declare the anti-constitutionality of that program, but also as a symbolic and political strategy, because that meant there were laws, there were papers, there were jurisdiction to use as a teacher who was being attacked because of their teaching in gender and sexuality topics. And there was, however, also cooptation of some of these organizations from the government, and even there was like use of trans people within the government as a token and like as a pink washing of the government, and say, oh no, this government cannot be against LGBTQ plus population because we have a trans person. And that same trans person who was an interviewee of my sample accepted the criticism that she got because of this collaborations with this state. And already to conclude, because I think I'm out of the time, yeah, there was obviously a shift in civil society-state relationships, because previously there have been co-production with the government of these education and gender and sexuality education policies. There was clearly a strategic adaptability of LGBTQA+ pro-public education organized civil society, because they were, some of them, they like reframed their way of advocacy, some of them emerged and like they were new. And there were though impacts of this post-truth politics based on fake news and social media and disinformed and polarized society. And finally, it is important to point out to the long-term impact and the importance of strategic reflexivity, because like it was 4 years of a government that destroyed from up to down, from left to right, everything that existed before to protect LGBTQ plus population and specifically targeting education. So in that sense, it is important this strategic reflexivity that all organized civil societies utilized and adapted their strategies to the situation. And I think it can enlighten also like other instances in the world, because these gender ideology attacks are not only in Brazil, but are embedded in many other countries in the world. And here in Spain, for instance, we also have, and we all know, Vox is like heading and leading this movement, right? And I think that's it. Thank you. You had to run. Yes, sorry. I don't know if there's any question that or comments. About to. Yeah, well, maybe we can also talk about it later. Yeah, because like now it's on the store. Sure. Come here. Venga. We are sharing. Todo bien. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for your patience and for being here until so late. We are almost at the end of the presentation, but I hope I don't bore you with mine. This study comes from Peru. I'm from Peru as well. My name is Andrea Velázquez, and the name of my study is Indigenous Knowledges from and Outside the School, Learnings from Rural Areas of Peru. The plural forms that you can see in the title are typos. These are ways of expressing the diversity and the plurality of indigenous knowledges, and also a way of consideration of the richness that indigenous knowledges involve. The intention of making this project, for me, it's a continuation, and I have the intention of contribute to make visible the power asymmetries that still are present in Global South, but everywhere, mainly related with indigenous knowledges and with indigenous peoples in education, but also make visible that there exist multiple knowledge systems. No? We can see that we are here learning, paying attention to different presentations, but and learning, I hope. But around the world, there exists also different ways of learning, being, and doing in the world. But sometimes we don't see them, or we don't want to see them. So beyond this, or additionally, in addition to this, I also wanted to create some reflections and to contribute to the way we do research. The first one, of course, making these kind of questions, but there is a vast field of scholars also reflecting about what are their positions at the time of doing research with indigenous peoples, and also even if they are not indigenous, and considering reflexivity as transversal in the research. So, well, I'm going to take probably a couple of extra minutes of my time. But the context of this research starts, well, considering that indigenous knowledges is, I would like that we see indigenous knowledge as something that is not static. Also, the consideration, the plural form of saying indigenous knowledges, it's to consider that it's not something static on the time. It's very dynamic. It adapts over time, and it changes. We can see, for example, in countries such as Bolivia, Guatemala, Mexico, Peru, rural indigenous people, it's mainly now in the capitals and in urban areas, for different reasons that we are going to explore some of them now. But we can see also that indigenous peoples all around the world, they are categorized as marginalized or a vulnerable sector. Just to illustrate, to put an example in terms of attendance rate, following the joint report, one of the last ones, students from Bolivia, Mexico, Guatemala, and Peru are in the last places in school attendance rates, just to have an idea. And this is a consequence of different reasons that I explored also during the thesis, but we can see that there are different exclusions that not considered in the indigenous, in the national curriculums and programs. One way in Peru that and the education system works is with intercultural bilingual education, and intercultural bilingual education programs has a lot of time, but in Peru, as probably, I don't know, we can speak a bit about this a bit later, but in Peru, for example, indigenous knowledges is seen as something underdeveloped that doesn't allow progress or to be as modernized as as Europe. So probably in Ghana as well, we can, so it's part of our context, but these conceptions of indigenous knowledge are not new, and these conceptions and notions are based a long time ago in the colony, for example, where it was needed to homogenize the country, to assimilate different people and different ways of seeing the world, with the purpose of continue exploring the country, and for other reasons as well. So considering this context, this complex context, I work with 3 research questions. It was interesting to try to follow these questions, because I also had a lot of emergent information. So one of my first questions was, how, if at all, is Quechua knowledge present in rural communities in the region of Cusco, Peru? What are the participant views about education in the area and about Quechua knowledge? And what are the aspects that involve these views? And what is the desired knowledge of community members students, teachers, and parents would like to receive. Just to mention, Quechua people is one of the largest ethnic groups that exist in Latin America. They are not only present in Peru, they are also present in Ecuador, one part of Argentina as well, with different names and aspects and characteristics, of course. But it's one of the biggest indigenous population in Peru. So I worked with the students, teachers, and parents from different communities in Cusco. And thank you. And the methodology I choose for this study was very interesting. I will tell you all this. Considering this history, considering this context that I shared with you, I choose the colonizing methodology and a participatory action research approach. The reason I want to do this is because, as I mentioned it in the beginning, I wanted to make transversal the fact that I was going from the academia, I was going with a privilege, even if I'm Peruvian, even if I've been related to indigenous communities for a long time, even if I have personal and history in the area, I knew that I was coming back to my country and to Cusco after a time. So I wanted to acknowledge, as some of us been working on. I was all the time trying to consider this privilege, and also to deconstruct how can I redistribute this power that these studies are going to give me in a way. How can we generate together? How can me with the community can co-develop the data that I'm presenting here? So, for example, I was wondering, how can the researcher's positionality and privilege be considered during this research? How can the influence of this privilege on relationships during the fieldwork be observed? I didn't work alone, because I was working also supervised by two professors from McGill University in Canada, who helped me to. She's here. Okay, she's not. So I've been working with extra help, because I knew I needed support to consider this kind of questions, and for all the bias I can have. I think that I wanted to be cautious about also this romantic idea that we can have about indigenous knowledge or indigenous people. Sometimes we are thinking, this is related with one of the things I said at the beginning, we are romanticizing them or essentializing them, thinking that they are like in a remote area, but we are not seeing, and with these kind of thoughts, we are contributed to some patterns that I will explain also here. So, well, these were transversal aspects that I consider during the research. And the methods, well, considering all these, I work with photo voice. And I'm very interested in photography, but I wanted to construct a visual narrative. So each student, I work with almost 20 students. Each one has a camera, and they took a group of pictures with. I have to go faster. So I worked with photo voice. We did some focus group, and I also was living in this community for 2 months. So I had the pleasure and the chance of doing some participant observations. And also I work with interviews, mainly with adult actors as teachers and parents from the area. So this is one of the focus groups where I print the pictures, and the students were working with the pictures. All the pictures are pink, by the way. So I found a lot of things, but the main ones are that there exists different ways of learning, as I mentioned. intercultural education programs are only considering one way of learning, that it's a very cognitive, rational way of learning, and Quechua people learn from their relatives, from their community. They learn in a collaborative way. They share with me that they also learn observing and doing at the same time. This picture, for example, shows children playing with harvest tools. They are not working; they are playing, but they are part of a space of work. They are in a farm, and I was also working there with the adults, with the parents of these child. But students also shared with me some learnings that they have in the school, and they, for example, share that they go to the school to learn how to obey, how to write well, how to be responsible, how to be professionals in the future. So it was interesting also. This is one thing that I explore also in my study, is this division between the school and between what the learnings and the knowledge in the community. So from these different ways of learnings, I also was curious about what do they think about the things they learn? What do they think about the education they receive? So I have a lot of opinions from parents and teachers here, but I saw that they are very proud of their traditions, their history, but it's Quechua knowledges, for example, is dismissed. They know that if they keep talking in Quechua, they are going to suffer from racism on the cities. They see that it's not useful to talk Quechua, for example, so they prefer and they ask to learn English or French or whatever other, or have a better, as they said, Spanish. Of course, this is part of the structural and social inequalities that Quechua people live on faith in Peru. As part of the desired knowledge, the knowledge they aspire to have, I see that there exists difference between the actors that I was working with. They want to have learnings that are related with being employable in the future, but they also want to learn how to, and they want to preserve their own identity. They want to have a section in my findings section related with recommendations from the actors, and I have there are students mentioning and proposing ways of preserving their own ways of being, the local ways of being. So, conclusions. This is the school. There, in Peru, and well, in different Ecuador, for example, in the case of Latin America, we have several attempts of intercultural education programs, but they're more superficial. In some contexts, they touch some contents of curriculum aspects, but we cannot see until now a cultural pertinent education that dialogue with the students' everyday lives and incorporates their points of views. My study still questions how can we make Western knowledge complementary with local and indigenous knowledges. It's not the purpose is not to make this contradictory. The goal is to make create a dialogue between them. And the purpose also of this study and the conclusion, one of the conclusions of this is that it is still needed to strengthen the epistemic justice. It's not possible. I think that all we are involved in social justice issues related to education. So I've been very interested in the fight for epistemic justice and to make visible how these different ways of being, learning, and knowing can be incorporated in the international agendas, educative international agendas, because I see that, for example, they mention international organizations mention inclusion, diversity, but sometimes it's more a token than are really willing to make epistemic justice. So the last point is just a reflection that I think that working with marginalized and vulnerable people should make us think about our own positions, because the single aspect of being part of academia, having a master's, speaking English as we are doing now, give us a position of power. And I think this is a chance, doing research is a chance also to reflect about this aspect in order to change it. Thank you.
If you have questions. Why don't you come? Since you are the next one.
These materials, and I was wondering if they were using them, and if so, how?
No, well, I have I didn't mention this in my thesis. I will mention this in future papers or presentation, I guess. But I have a lot of information related with Quechua and the lack of contextualization. Just in Peru, we have more or less 8 varieties of Quechua. So in Cusco, they're receiving the education material with a variety that it's not part of that. So they don't use it. They don't use it. I saw the text in boxes in a room, and this is one of the main complaints from teachers. And yeah, I mean, teachers mention it a lot, but it's totally it's not part of the context, and they don't have time to work to contextualize everything, and that students don't understand the contents that the Ministry of Education sends.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for having me here. I'm from cohort number 5. So as you may already notice, being early with me. So thank you very much for this space.
Yes, sure.
I'll try to be quick so we can all go home or drink something, as Laia has proposed.
Yeah, Carmen, is this yours? Well,
Yes.
yeah. So it's so nice that he wanted to like kind of close the circle, no? Like,
Yes, this is like a personal revenge because they couldn't.
it's here, you better.
So
So.
I also did my research in Peru, and I analyzed an incentive policy called Bono Escuela. I did a realist evaluation. We'll see what's that about, but it's basically try to go inside the process of the how the policy works and see if it was actually working. So I'm just gonna do a quick introduction to what an incentive policy is. So it's basically giving an extra amount of money to the teachers whose schools obtain the better results on the annual high-stake assessment and evaluation that you all know. There are many countries. They only assess second and fourth of primary and secondary level. And this, the performance of each school is based on a school performance index that is a headache. I will not expand on that, but just keep in mind that the goal of this policy is to increase teacher motivation so that the school get better learning outcomes, whatever that is. And this policy was held in Peru from 2014 until 2019. So there's an international debate whether these policies work or not. Some say yes, some say no. For example, in the US, this policy was very much criticized. But in some other countries like Israel or Mexico, they said it worked. I mean, most of these studies were quantitative, and so they don't consider the context. In the Peruvian case, there were 2 evaluations of this type of this Bona Escuela, but they were made by an NGO that was very much related to the Ministry of Education, and of course they said it worked. But apart from getting better learning outcomes, my interest was how were teachers being motivated, and if so, how they enact this motivation. What were the practical measures in order to obtain better learning outcomes? So my guiding questions was where if Bona Escuela is motivating teachers, how does it do it? And if it happens, does it vary across regions? You all know that Peru is a very diverse country. So my guess was that rural and urban differences may be affecting this motivation. And yeah, that's basically it. My methodology was very hard to define. At first, I wanted to do a mixed approach, but due to COVID-19, I only could interview presentially like 10 or 12 teachers. Then Delta came. I also got the COVID, so I had to like call teachers from my hotel. I went to first Amazonas, which is a tropical region, basically the Amazon. Then I went to Ayacucho, it's in the highlands on the way to Cusco from Lima, and also in Lima, different districts. So yeah, I did in total 22 in-depth interviews. And my hypotheses were that also the literature said that job satisfaction could affect this motivation. So that was one of the first hypotheses, and the other I already mentioned, the regional one, very basic. So my findings were that motivation and expectancy to win was very high and equal across different regions. So it didn't affect that the teachers were not satisfied with their salary. And this is very important because in the context of Peruvian magisterium, the teachers, they were very, very angry at the ministry's reform policies. In 2017, there was a huge strike. They stopped the whole educational system for like 5 months. And the leader of that strike was then our president, Pedro Castillo. So I know it's very hard to keep in mind which is our president because we have like 6 in 2 years, but it was very important. And also the findings, a very important finding was that this motivation, this was very widespread, translated into a lot of opportunistic behaviors that were also very much already stated in the literature in other countries. I'm talking about modifying the curriculum towards the what is being tested, teaching to the test. Teachers would would make students stay after class to reinforce the areas that are being assessed, and some other type of strategies. So I was very surprised that even though I was a white male from the capital that had already been working in the ministry, the teachers had no problem in telling me that they would do such strategies that for me are very detrimental, not only for learning, but like for students' health, you know? And I also found that some demotivational factors that I was not aware of, because I had already been working in rural schools in Peru, and that's when I heard about this policy. But I didn't know that teachers were demotivated by some irregular processes. I'm talking about corruption. There was this free rider effect that teachers felt that because the school performance index gives more money to the teachers that are being assessed, those grades. So the rest of the school felt like, or these teachers from these grades felt like the other teachers were getting money for free. So that would demotivate them to make any effort. And also, after 2 or 3 years of not winning, the school would be like, why are we making this effort if we are not getting the money? There was also, I call this professional offense, but some teachers in Ayacucho were not motivated by the policy because they said that they didn't they were not making these efforts for the money, but it was their job, it was their duty. So they had like this very professional identity that was feeling insulted by this policy, which is kind of what I was looking for when I thought about this job insatisfaction in my hypothesis. Anyway, my conclusions were that this extrinsic motivation policies normalizes opportunistic strategies such as the ones we were discussing, rather than actually prove the performance of teachers, not to mention the detrimental effects on student learning. My sample was very brief, so it's not that I could make any, conclusions of what I found, but it was very clear that these practical measures were not were the same in all the regions I visited. And also that this job insatisfaction didn't affect their motivation towards the reward. I was very surprised because even though they were not happy with their salary, and they were very aware of the difficulties of their school, they still thought that they had the same chances to win as any other school, which for me means that this reform meritocratic discourse is very much embedded in the teacher's professionality. I also brought some questions, or my thesis brought me some questions that I wanted to share. Should teachers' salary be directly connected to learning outcomes? For me, it was very expensive because it makes clear that the ministry had the money to raise their salary, but instead preferred to put all these requirements and reinforce some learning outcomes that are related to the market, to the fuerza de trabajo, Thank you. And so the other question was, how is this external pressure affecting students' learning in other subjects that are not assessed by the evaluation, such as history, art, music, whatever they would like to do, like trying to learn how to work on the fields to connect these two angles. And the other is what I just mentioned, how this meritocratic discourse is very much embedded, even though they are not happy with their salary. And that is it. Thank you for listening. Do you have any question, comment?
Oh, good. Okay. Thank you. Right, so we will finish here. One second. We will finish here the online session. Thank you everyone who was on the other side. And I hope you enjoyed the journey across the world as much as we did here. And so thank you, the students, everyone. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. Thank you, everyone. We will close here and we will stay with Kavya maybe 2 minutes, but not online anymore. Maybe if you want to share some thoughts about your research, because I think, yeah, she's a very creative person and she has brought here pictures and a lot of stuff. So yeah, but offline. So thank you very much and